The latest geopolitical tensions surrounding Iran and the Strait of Hormuz are now dominating discussions ahead of the upcoming summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in Beijing. Reports published this week confirm that President Trump rejected Iran's latest proposal tied to ending the conflict and reopening the Strait of Hormuz, arguing that Tehran continues to delay meaningful negotiations over its nuclear program. At the same time, China remains heavily exposed to disruptions in Middle Eastern oil supplies because of its dependence on Iranian crude imports. Analysts say that issue is expected to become a major focus during the Trump-Xi talks scheduled for mid-May 2026. Meanwhile, Mike Lawler continues to serve as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and has been publicly supporting the administration's hardline position on Iran and energy policy. Based on those developments, here is the rewritten journalist-style version. Rising tensions in the Middle East are rapidly reshaping global diplomacy, with Washington and Beijing now heading toward one of the most consequential meetings in years. The conflict involving Iran, disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, and growing economic pressure on China have all combined to create a highly charged atmosphere ahead of the summit between President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The latest escalation came after President Trump publicly dismissed Iran's response to a proposed framework aimed at ending the crisis. The administration believes Tehran is attempting to buy time rather than directly address concerns surrounding its nuclear ambitions and regional activities. According to officials familiar with the discussions, Iran has demanded an immediate halt to hostilities, a gradual reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and relief from U.S. sanctions before agreeing to move forward with broader negotiations. Tehran has also reportedly pushed for delaying nuclear talks for at least another month, but Washington appears unwilling to compromise on the central issue. Speaking about the administration's position, Congressman Mike Lawler argued that Iran has repeatedly used negotiations as a strategy to delay meaningful outcomes. They try and delay talks. They try not to address the actual issue at hand in the hopes that somehow they will outlast everybody, he said. Lawler emphasized that President Trump has already shown significant patience throughout the standoff, but remains determined to dismantle Iran's nuclear capabilities. Iran is going to have to give up its enriched uranium. That's the only way this is going to end, he said. The dispute is now extending far beyond the Middle East itself. Analysts say the conflict has become deeply intertwined with the broader strategic rivalry between the United States and China. China remains the largest purchaser of Iranian petroleum, and the ongoing instability surrounding the Strait of Hormuz has created growing concern in Beijing over EA energy security and supply chain disruptions. The strait remains one of the world's most critical shipping corridors, with a significant share of global oil exports moving through the narrow waterway every day. The upcoming Trump-Xi summit is therefore expected to focus not only on trade and tariffs, but also on China's relationship with Iran and Beijing's role in helping stabilize the crisis. Lawler argued that the current situation is placing enormous pressure on China because of its dependence on Iranian energy exports. China purchases 90% of Iran's petroleum, he said, describing the economic consequences as significant for Beijing. He suggested that the Trump administration's pressure campaign against Iran has also exposed vulnerabilities in China's global alliances. According to Lawler, the administration has been targeting networks and partnerships that Washington believes are designed to weaken American influence internationally. The congressman said the closure and disruption of shipping routes in the Strait of Hormuz have had a much larger impact on China than on the United States itself. The impact of the Strait of Hormuz being closed has a far greater impact on China than it does the United States, he said. That pressure, he argued, may ultimately force Beijing to negotiate more seriously with Washington during the upcoming summit. The Trump administration has increasingly linked energy dominance to national security strategy. Officials argue that America's ability to expand domestic oil and gas production has strengthened Washington's leverage during international crises. Lawler criticized critics of traditional energy production, saying some policymakers underestimate the strategic importance of oil and gas. It is so important for the U.S. to continue to be the leader when it comes to energy production, he said. He argued that American energy independence gives Washington greater flexibility in responding to geopolitical threats and international instability. The administration believes China is now facing the consequences of relying too heavily on Iranian energy supplies while simultaneously attempting to challenge U.S. influence. Lawler claimed Iran attempted to pressure global markets through disruptions in oil flows, but the United States responded aggressively. President Trump, pun intended, trumped their blockade and stopped the flow of oil out, he said. The growing conflict has also intensified attention on supply chains and trade relations between Washington and Beijing. President Trump's upcoming trip to China marks his first visit there during his current term and the first by a sitting U.S. president since 2017. Business leaders are expected to accompany the president during the summit as both sides attempt to stabilize economic ties after years of rising tensions. The administration has repeatedly argued that full economic decoupling between the United States and China remains unrealistic in the short term because of how deeply integrated the two economies remain. Still, major disagreements persist over technology, industrial competition, tariffs, and geopolitical influence across Asia and the Middle East. Observers say the Iran conflict has dramatically increased the stakes surrounding the summit. Both Washington and Beijing have strong incentives to prevent further disruptions to global trade and energy markets, but they remain sharply divided over how to deal with Tehran. Lawler suggested that President Xi now faces mounting pressure to work more closely with the United States in order to stabilize the situation. President Xi is going to have to come to the negotiating table with President Trump, he said. He added that the current moment may ultimately produce either a major agreement between the two countries or continuation of escalating pressure. The broad economic consequences of the crisis are already being felt worldwide. Rising oil prices and shipping uncertainty have created concerns across global markets, particularly in Asia. American officials believe China's own economic slowdown increases Beijing's incentive to seek stability quickly. The conversation also turned toward America's domestic political battles, particularly over immigration funding and congressional negotiations. Republicans are currently attempting to advance a major funding package focused on immigration enforcement and border security. The proposed legislation includes billions of dollars for agencies such as Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection. Lawler criticized Democratic leaders in Congress for forcing Republicans to rely on reconciliation procedures to move funding measures forward. We have to get the funding for ICE and CBP done, he said. He accused Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of obstructing standard appropriations processes. It is a dangerous precedent that they have created, Lawler said. Republic. Icons are also discussing the possibility of additional reconciliation legislation tied to defense spending and election security proposals. Among the issues being debated are voter identification requirements and proof of citizenship measures, which Republicans argue have broad public support. Lawler described those proposals as overwhelmingly popular with voters. The American people overwhelmingly support them, he said. The discussion then shifted to political and economic developments in New York, where concerns are growing among business leaders over the city's economic direction. Recent reports suggest some major investors and corporations are reconsidering future investments in New York because of fears surrounding tax increases and regulatory changes. Lawler sharply criticized the agenda of New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, accusing him of pursuing policies that could drive businesses and wealthy investors out of the city. He specifically pointed to concerns surrounding billionaire investor Ken Griffin and the possibility of companies relocating operations elsewhere, including Florida. Lawler argued that the rise of remote work since the pandemic has fundamentally changed how companies think about office space and business headquarters. Businesses don't need to be in Midtown Manhattan in large commercial buildings to operate, he said. Warned that targeting major employers and investors with higher taxes could have severe long-term consequences for New York's economy. This was going to be the consequence of his socialist agenda, Lawler said. He claimed wealthy investors and corporations now have more flexibility than ever to leave high-tax states and relocate operations elsewhere. Pointing to Griffin's previous decision to move Citadel from Chicago to Miami, Lawler said, New York risks losing billions in future investment. They don't need to be in New York anymore, he said. Lawler also criticized New York Governor Kathy Hochul, accusing state leadership of overspending while simultaneously shrinking the tax base. He argued that years of aggressive taxation and spending policies have weakened New York's competitiveness and accelerated the departure of businesses and residents. They have learned nothing and they're going to pay the consequence for it, he said. As global tensions continue to rise and economic uncertainty spreads across international markets, the upcoming meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi is increasingly being viewed as a pivotal moment, not only for U.S.-China relations, but also for the broader stability of the global economy. With energy security, trade disputes, Middle East tensions, and geopolitical competition all colliding at once, the summit may determine whether Washington and Beijing can still find common ground during one of the most volatile periods in recent years. Source transcript.